All right, English teacher friends. So for this writing workshop, we're going to highlight rhetorical analysis yet again, and we're going to put into the spotlight a fantastic letter that Kobe Bryant wrote to himself called Dear 17-Year-Old Self. So prior to his passing, I believe he was 42 years old, he reflected back upon his becoming a Los Angeles Laker at the age of 17. And he writes life advice to himself from this very retrospective perspective, and it's very rich. I mean, there's so many juicy little tidbits in there rhetorically. So not only did I love Kobe as a player, as a human being, but he was actually a brilliant man, very good writer. And from a theoretical, technical side, there's just a lot of really good writing going on in this piece. And again, to kind of target a wide audience in terms of our class base, this was definitely a crowd pleaser for my more athletically minded student. So without further ado, let's jump right in. As you know, one of the things I always ask is, what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? And when we answer that question, what we get is composition teachers positioning themselves as experts in the classroom. And they literally paint with their students. And here's what I mean by that. So let's say we're doing a rhetorical analysis writing workshop with our class, with our students. And what I would do is this. I would say, all right, guys, we're going to use templates just like Bob Ross used templates. He used the wet on wet technique. We're doing a rhetorical analysis, so we know that we have to declare the thesis. Here's 3 declarative theses that I wrote. 1, 2, 3. On your mark, get set, go, do it. It really demystifies the process when teachers position themselves as the experts in the classroom and just take a Bob Ross approach. Show them how to do the intro. Show them how to do the bodies. Flex the voice, the tier 2, the colloquial, the vernacular. Show them how to do it. Show them how to punctuate correctly. And lo and behold, you'll have a group of masterful writers once you do this a few times. So I always emphasize that, instead of assigning, teach it, paint it. So the question we have to answer is this. So how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always with my templates, there's 2 choices. You can declare or invert. And for those that are familiar with my work, you know that for rhetorical analysis, we always declare. For literary analysis, we always invert. And then for argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research, it's a 50-50 coin flip, contingent upon the prompt and the writer's rhetorical purpose. You can either declare or invert for those expository modes. So let's break down the template of the declarative thesis and discuss why we're going to use that instead of the inverted model. So here's the kicker, though. If you take a look at FRQ2 on the AP Lang exam, College Board is really good at writing prompts, obviously. And one of the things that's implicit in every prompt that they articulate on paper are 2 questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, you know that these 2 questions are also static in literary analysis. So FRQ1 and FRQ2 on the AP literature exam. So poetry, prose, short stories, even novels and plays. If you got a good prompt that's setting your students up to perform literary analysis and not plot analysis, you're asking these 2 questions either explicitly or implicitly. So in literary analysis, here's what we do. We invert the thesis. So we end with the thesis. And then we sprinkle in the tier 2 level vocabulary, which is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. Sprinkle in some context and background. Focus on those sentence constructs. So as you know, I espouse and endorse the belief that Strunk and White put out there in their seminal text called Write It Right. The idea that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you're going to see my students, have quite expressive syntax, be able to manipulate and wield some complex sentences for the purposes of voice, rhythm, and flow. And it's always going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So for literary analysis, that's what we do. And what you do is you take 3 sentences of the 4 are answering the question, what is the authorial intent? And then the thesis statement is, how does the author construct meaning? And that comes in the last sentence. I got a ton of stuff on my YouTube channel if you want to do a further deep dive into that. So for rhetorical analysis, we're going to begin with the thesis. And what I mean by that is we're going to start with, how does the author construct meaning? In my classroom, I have a poster that looks like this. And it's a running list, a running tally of all the terms and devices, rhetorical terms and devices, that students see as we go from text to text to text. And at the time of doing this Kobe Bryant piece, this is what we've seen so far. So when my students are answering the question, how does the author construct meaning? I tell them that it's not a singular thing that the author's doing. So these terms and devices, they jigsaw piece each other, they interface each other, they talk to each other, they hold hands with each other. So I tell them to find like the 3 most salient, germane, pertinent, relevant terms that construct the meaning. So you're going to have like 3 sentences that focus on the construction of meaning, lead with the most important. And then you have 1 sentence that focuses on the authorial intent. So it's the absolute flip of literary analysis. So you're going to begin with the thesis, take all that stuff that you learned from my Word Study Academy, intensive vocab study from start to finish for all of your classes with your students, augment that vocab to address the vocabulary void. Context and background, don't confuse that by regurgitating the letter. Don't give a plot synopsis of the letter. Just a little bit of context and background. Flex those sentence constructs for voice, rhythm, and flow. Exactly 4 sentences. So let's take a look at a few intros for this. So I have three separate students all going to use the exact same approach. So start with, how does the author construct meaning, right? So look at how this is worded here. With the wisdom that only hindsight can afford, Kobe spells out some simple advice to his 17-year-old self. All right, so we got a couple of things going on here that are implied. With the wisdom that only hindsight can afford. So you kind of got the ethos and you got the tone, right? The whole idea that this is this retrospective expose, Kobe writing, life advice to his 17-year-old self. So he's wiser now. He's 42 years old. He's got this. He's learned something along the way from being 17, the start of his Laker career, to 42. So again, I have my students imply their rhetorical terms and devices. I think it's more skillful than saying, with the wisdom that only hindsight can afford, Kobe builds his ethos and says, right, that this, I don't know, I want it to be conversational. I'm not a big fan of the explicit. So we have ethos, we have tone. All right, so let's see where it goes. By drawing a clear dichotomy philosophically between the act of giving versus investing in loved ones. So we got the dichotomy is the second thing, which also kind of ties into the logos. He opines that sometimes ego can interfere with what are seemingly good intentions. All right, so we went from this to dichotomy. All right, so we're 2 in, still focus on the construction of meaning. Focusing hard on the singular pronoun of you, Kobe at times chides his former self for its naive assumptions, right? So you got the syntax, the pronouns. So we got 3 things that construct the meaning. Now get to the authorial intent in the last sentence. Reflective and owning, Kobe realizes that enabling others through the act of giving is a rather wayward and potentially harmful expression of love and kindness. And that's sort of the exigence, the aha. Why did he write this? What's his thesis? What's his universal truth that he's articulating in this? So it's always 3 plus 1. 3 construction of meaning, 1 authorial intent. Usually my guides will get anchored in 3 terms and or devices, 1 sentence authorial intent. Let's see what student number 2 does. Reflective with the weight of years of wisdom beneath his belt. So that's the ethos. Kobe looks over his shoulder and offers a few words of advice to his 17-year-old self. So you got to talk about a theme. That's the context and background. Along his journey as a Laker, he came upon the epiphany that it is wiser to invest in loved ones rather than to just pass out free token gifts. So that's the logos. Giving just to give, so he came to learn, actually holds a person back instead of advancing them forward. Stern in knowing, Kobe tells the specter of his former you that a different tact must be taken in the future when handling the precious lives of friends and family. So by air quoting the you got the syntax. Stern in knowing is the tone. So one of the things that I always tell my students is to identify a couple of tones, because tone's not monolithic. And I also tell them to go tier 2 for one of their tone words. Stern's a good word. So we have elevated vocab, but the student doesn't sound contrived. They don't sound pretentious. They don't sound like a goon. Good words, reflective, weight of years, right? So going through this, epiphany's nice, wiser to invest, stern, specter, tact, right? So precious. All these great words, but look at the sentence structures too. So there's great variety in the sentence structure. So look at this. Giving just to give, comma, so he came to learn, comma, actually holds a person back instead of advancing them forward. So lots of stop and go, voice, rhythm, flow. So it's very, very nice. Out of the gate, student 1 and student 2 are off with blazing speed. Let's see what student 3 does. How does the author construct meaning? What is the authorial intent? 3 plus 1. Let's see it. Speaking with the experience of someone who's been spurned by being overly generous, Kobe tells his 17-year-old self to recognize the seismic difference between investing in loved ones versus simply giving free handouts. So you got ethos and logos in one fell swoop here. While being generous is certainly a noble attribute, Kobe, in looking over his shoulder, notes the vice inherent in the seeming virtue. So this is just context and background, qualification of that first sentence, context, background. Giving without strings is in essence a form of enablement. Having learned this the hard way, Kobe scolds his former you with the wisdom of his years. So we get into the syntax. So you got ethos, logos, and syntax as the 3 salient points in this, right? 3 construction of meaning, 1 authorial intent. Focus on those sentence constructs. Focus on that tier 2. I like this, spurned and seismic, notable attribute. Right? So good vocab, enablement. So don't overdo the vocab. You got to stay in your wheelhouse and sound natural. Stay in your lane. And then just flex on those sentence constructs to get the flow going. And if students are able to do this, they're definitely out of the gate very fast. And for our AP friends, they're in consideration for the sophistication point without doubt if they can write like this. So our next question becomes, how do I write the body paragraphs? And I always say this, same as always, bust out a syllogism. So for those that are new, I'll give you a cursory overview of the syllogistic method. And for ye new people, go into my YouTube channel and take a look at videos where I do real good deep dives on inductive and deductive reasoning and kind of historical overview of the syllogistic method. If once I get through this presentation, you're like, I don't quite have a firm grasp of this. There's tons of stuff in the YouTube channel. So the syllogistic method belongs to Aristotle. It comes from the Aristotelian tradition. He ran a school called the Lyceum, in which the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, debate, oration, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And like us, Aristotle was concerned with line of reasoning. He called it cogency. And he was kind of confuddled early in his career as to why certain boys would just crush debates and others were just kind of meh, and some would just tank bomb. And he said, did God come around on his gravy train and say, Jason will be endowed with the gift of the gab? And Todd he's going to be terrible at this talking stuff, this arguing stuff. And he said, no, I can't believe that. That's defeatist. All my students are capable of learning. So he kind of opened up the lid of the brains of his better orators, and he had a eureka moment one day, and he said, aha, I got it. The real good debaters, those that lay down cogent arguments, are arguing syllogistically. And this is what he meant by that. When we proceed syllogistically, we go from premise, conclusion. It's very mathematical, it's very computative, it's very logical, it's very well reasoned. So I could say, premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. Like, that's cogent, that's lockstep, bulletproof logic. And when our students write, we want them to do that. One of the things that happens, though, is that students lose the centrality of their argument. And one thing that the College Board does that I wish they would change is this. Only on FRQ 1 for the Lang exam, they say 3 times, your argument must be central. And I wish they would say that on all 6 FRQs, Lang and Lit combined, all 6 essays, your argument must be central. Because expository writing is an act of arguing. It's argumentation. You're arguing when you write rhetorical analysis. So it's really important that students have a first premise. And oftentimes, if we look at College Board sample papers, students are only offering a second premise. And that's why it reads like a Cliff Note summation of Kobe Bryant's letter. Right? So they just kind of regurgitate the tale. They regurgitate the story of the letter. And they've switched expository modes in their writing, plot analysis versus rhetorical analysis. So it's really important that we keep the centrality of the argument. And this is how we're going to do it. The first premise is an argument containing the rhetorical terms and devices. This always takes 3 sentences. I'm adamant on this. I want my students to keep the centrality of their argument. If they start quoting and paraphrasing too high up in the body paragraph, then they've switched the expository mode to plot analysis versus rhetorical analysis. So I say take 3 sentences, and I'll really get into the reasons why when I show you the exemplar. From there, second premise begins the 4th sentence. It's the textual support. And this is where you teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. Kids have the text in front of them. They can liberally quote from it, but paraphrase as well. You don't want to do one, far more at the expense of the other. Otherwise, it falls out of kilter. And the conclusion of the body paragraph, and I want to emphasize that. The conclusion of the body paragraph is the textual analysis, and this is where the students make their links, their promises, and their echo. First premise is a promise. To sustain the line of reasoning, you got to link it back. Echo the thesis, echo the prompt, and all of this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. Those little itty-bitty 4 or 5 sentence bagger paragraphs that our students write, just don't cut it. There's not nearly enough support and analysis in there to really advance an argument. So what's this first premise look like? What are we doing in these first 3 sentences? A couple of things. One, students often say, where do I begin my analysis? And I say, begin where Kobe Bryant begins. What's the first thing he does rhetorically? So my students start with a clause like this, right from the onset. You cue to your reader that you're supremely organized, chronological, and sequential, that you're just going to methodically go through this and cross-weave when necessary. So we've already set the stage that we are going to be organized and we are going to have a line of reason. So what we do is this. In these 3 sentences, find a few things that Kobe does early on in his letter, right? So as to avoid the following scenario. 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph syntax, 1 paragraph pathos, 1 paragraph ethos, right? So you got to multitask here. You got to see where the pieces, the rhetorical pieces, hold hands and interconnect with each other. So look how there are a few terms and devices in the promise of the first premise here. So let's just read this. Right from the onset, Kobe draws a stark difference at the denotative level between the act of giving versus investing, right? So we're going to do diction analysis between the literal term giving and investing. And that's what Kobe does. He plays with the semantics of giving and investing right out of the gate. That's his logos, right? bold capping the words and using white space dramatically. So we're going to analyze the syntax. So you see what we got here? We got logos and diction. Now we got syntax. He carefully delineates the semantic schism between the two philosophical approaches, bolstering his tone. So now we got to analyze tone as well. With the singular focus on the you pronoun, Kobe falls short of reprimanding himself for his kind gestures gone awry. Same thing, got to focus on those sentence constructs, keep the tier 2 going, don't overdo it. We're 3 sentences in. If we phrase this as a promise, like I promised you, dear reader, to talk about certain things, we got to talk about the diction, and the difference in the denotative meanings of giving and investing. We got to talk about the syntax, and we got to talk about the tone. And by extension, we're automatically going to get the theme. All right, we don't even need to say it. Second premise always starts fourth sentence. You started off with diction, so you got to go with diction. Find the quote that best shows the denotative difference between giving and investing. So you have to do that first because you dropped it first here. So here it is. Immediately, he isolates the contrast between investment and give. Ta! Easy. Holy cow, we got a line of reasoning going here. Standing alone as separate paragraphs and assertive independent clauses. So look at this. We're even into like sentence constructions here. Cool. He draws the logical difference between the two terms by capitalizing each letter. So why are we talking about syntax? Because that was the second thing we mentioned, right? So we're cool. Bryant explains that most people with kind and compassionate hearts think that purely giving material things to siblings and friends may appear to be the right decision, but in doing so, one subtracts the most precious gift of all, independence and growth. So let's talk about quote transitions. That was a really silky smooth quote transition, and I actually quoted 2 times in one sentence. Whoa, sophistication. Here's how this works. It's a simple template. If a student places a minimum, so a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote small, then it should sound conversational. Sometimes you need to bracket, as the student did here, right? And sometimes you got to use dashes to separate everything and keep it flowing. So you got to have, some syntactical manipulation, be able to make syntactical choices, but also know how to like piecemeal these quotes together. Bob Rossing that stuff goes a long way. Kids need to see that. You got to show them how to do that. We quoted, we analyze. In many ways, Kobe's logic is akin to the give a man a fish adage. In a proverbial sense, he was giving his friends and family fish instead of teaching them how to fish. The big thing, however, is that Kobe learned that his intentions were not pure. Using an aphora. Oh, cool. So that kind of ties in up here. Good. The syntax. He points the finger at himself and says, you feel good. It made you happy. And that was extremely selfish of you. Notice this. We have you. And we're focusing here in the first premise on the you pronoun. That's a perfect quote for that, right? So you have to have germane quotes. All the quotes need to be relevant and pertain to the promise of the first premise in order to sustain the line of reasoning. With the benefit of hindsight, Kobe realizes that his ego was a main motivator in why his decisions backfired. His intentions were good, but they were not pure. Instead of helping his friends and family realize their own dreams and find their true purpose, he conversely struggled to wean them off the addiction that he facilitated. Again, look at that. Sophistication, double quote in one line. The kids don't know how to do that. Most kids don't know how to do that, but it can be taught. And then you got to teach them this bracket stuff. We quoted, analyze it. Addiction is such a loaded word, but it is what Kobe uses to describe the conditions he created, conditions that led to anger, resentment, and jealousy from everybody involved, including himself. So let's go back before we take a look at the conclusion. We got a number of quotes. We got a number of paraphrases. One is not done more at the expense of the other. We promised to talk about the denotative difference between giving versus investing. Did we do that? Yes. We promised to talk about syntax. Did we do that? Yes. with the pronoun you in particular. And we got the anaphora in there. And we also promised to talk about the logos. Did we do that? Yes. Did we talk about anything else? No. Therefore, we have a real cogent line of reasoning. But we just can't walk away from a quote. I hate when kids do that, right? They end a paragraph on a quote. You can't do that. So let's wrap it up. Let's go back to the prompt. Let's go back to the thesis. Let's go back to the initial first premise. A 17-year-old being given the keys to the kingdom is rare. But Kobe knows that his gifts are being rewarded with the undertaking of huge responsibilities. Given it to do over, the giving would be eclipsed by the investing. Because that's where we started. End where you started. So we talked about the denotative difference between those two words. End there. And that takes all like 10, 12 sentences to achieve that. And the next question is this: what do I do next? And you tell the students you still have a whole bunch of rhetorical terms and devices left to analyze. You haven't done a lot of things. So what you're going to do is bust out another syllogism, change the rhetorical terms and devices, jigsaw connect those together, get those brothers to hold hands, choose some new quotes, choose some new paraphrases, 10 sentences, 3 sentences first premise, 4th sentence begins second premise, sprinkle in your quotes, your paraphrases, and then wrap it all up at the end. So my students always do 4 paragraphs for rhetorical analysis: intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. And that's it. So, and I should probably say this, all of my kids for all 6 FRQs only do 4 paragraphs. So intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. And that seems to cut it. So if you got questions or want to try your hand at Bob Rossing some of your own samples, or if you'd like the slides, hit me up at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. You could also hit me up with questions about my National Writing Project courses, or visit my website at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So just as a word of knowing, the National Writing Project and I have teamed up, and they are offering my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind through them, which is cool because now you can get professional development hours for what you need for certification. So it is by definition a 5-hour course. So the Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. We meet Sunday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we do that 5 weeks in a row, 5 hours. The kicker is this: NWP gives you a 10-hour completion badge for doing that. Homework is minimal, probably like 15 minutes a week. So it's kind of cool. You get 10 hours. So we're also going to be offering a self-paced course and a bunch of little like bit courses, little bit series. So I'm going to do some seminars on my alternative grading methods, my teaching line of reasoning seminars, AP strategies for success, my word study academy, my nuance academy, all that good stuff we're going to be doing through NWP so that teachers can get awarded their PD hours. So super cool. And I think another iron I have in the fire that I'll announce is that Tim Freitas of Garden of English fame and his buddy Brandon Abden, who's also my buddy, the 3 of us are going to be presenting at the NCTE conference this coming November in Anaheim, California. So look forward to that. And apart from that, I'm just going strong. Going to keep making videos and doing my thing. So hope this serves you well. Hope it's good. And happy teaching, happy writing.